February 16, 2026. We are in the fourth year and day 358 since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Welcome, I greet you, to the Situation Report. In today's report, we will see some attacks. We will also take a look at the contradictory statements made once again by the Russian Ministry of Defense. And what else we will look at. These are the words of Russian military bloggers about the current situation at the front, which are highly interesting, as well as much more. Tomorrow there will likely be a heavy airstrike on Ukraine. That's what many analysts think, since there are several Russian guided missile cruisers in the Black Sea that have now set sail again. Most of the time, that indicates a heavy attack in the near future. Likewise, at Ingalls 2, the strategic bomber fleet of the Russian Air Forces is said to have been put on alert again, which means that we could probably expect a rather heavy airstrike in the next little over 30 hours. But where an attack is already taking place is near Belgorod. Sirens, explosions, and interception attempts. The images somehow resemble what we're used to seeing from Ukrainian cities, only this time it's Russian territory. The Russian leadership announced soon after the invasion that they would establish a so-called buffer zone on Ukrainian territory. This was supposed to protect the Russian population from Ukrainian attacks and actually prevent attacks like today's. Belgorod was supposed to be out of reach of the Ukrainian armed forces. In fact, the opposite has happened. The city remains vulnerable, and it will apparently continue to be so. That is actually quite remarkable from a military perspective. A buffer zone is not a political term, it's not something abstract, but rather an operational promise. Whoever announces it is also implicitly committing to controlling territory and securing their own depth. But the fact that this doesn't succeed points to a logical limit, whether in terms of personnel, logistics, or tactics. In addition, the Russian forces are tied up on several fronts, mainly on the Eastern Front and also in the Zaporizhia area. The Donbass is consuming personnel and equipment without delivering decisive breakthroughs. When an offensive reaches its culmination point, meaning the moment when further attacks cost more strength than they bring, every additional task becomes a burden, such as creating a buffer zone, especially when hardly any progress is being made on the main front. So, this is yet another such additional task. Belgorod thus becomes a symbol of a problem. The strategic depth that was supposed to be created here does not exist. Instead, the war is increasingly shifting into Russian territory, and the more frequently such attacks occur, the clearer it becomes. A simple promise does not replace operational control. There is also another attempt to enlarge a buffer zone, namely here in the area around Sumi. Russian channels are also reporting that in this region, where they wanted to establish this buffer zone, the 83rd Russian Brigade was attacked with 100 soldiers on December 13th. By now, all of them are Code 200. By the way, Code 200 means killed in action on the battlefield. So you can see, even in these areas with the buffer zones, by the way, here is the 83rd Brigade in the area with the formation of buffer zones. The losses there are still very high, almost as high as at the main front, even though there is actually less fighting here. But now it gets interesting. Even one of the most well-known and regime-loyal military telegram channels in Russia is quite irritated. And that's remarkable. The channel Military Informant openly spoke of a mix between funny and sad after the Ministry of Defense apparently contradicted itself. The trigger was a visit by Chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov to the Central Troop Group. In the morning reports, it was said that in Monograd, called Dimitrov by Russia, the fighting is still ongoing. Only about 30% of the city is under their control. But wait a minute, where is Monograd? Let's take a look at the map because my status is orange. Here near Pokrovsk, we can see Pokrovsk here. Actually, almost everything here is under Russian control. I've already marked it as a Russian Oban. Up here, there are more battles towards Rudinsky. They've been ongoing for almost half a year now, and here at Monograd North, there's hardly any progress. Because the problem is, we have fighting here between the Russians and the Ukrainian soldiers. Both sides still claim to have soldiers in the town, and both sides are probably right. But neither of them can really prove that the town or certain districts are under their control. The Russians have never published anything here in the West, not even a flag from them like they usually do, or any other proof that they were able to reach the town center. But the Ukrainians on the other side also haven't been able to upload any videos. For example, showing them attacking Russian soldiers with drones. Those attacks also took place here on the outskirts of the city or in the immediate vicinity. That means this area is still a gray zone. But I marked them in dark orange because I assume that the Russians simply dominate more here. Given the overall situation in this sector, that's not far-fetched at all. And this is exactly the place we're talking about. Here, Gerasimov claims that 30% has been captured. It was explained that the Russian side and the 5th Motorized Rifle Brigade are fighting surrounded Ukrainian forces in the city's south. They're discussing encircling those forces and suggesting they already control everything north of these battles. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an encirclement. But the problem is as follows. Already on the 31st, on December 31, 2025, Defense Minister Andrei Belousov officially congratulated this very brigade on the complete liberation of Monograd. At that time, the statement spoke of the complete capture of the town, without any limitations, not like now. The explanation now being discussed sounds almost trivial, yet it is revealing. Apparently, no current video of Gerasimov's visit was released, but rather old footage from the 9th. The footage from December 9th was replayed and presented as if it were current. As a result, the earlier statement about this over 30% control resurfaced in the news. They used exactly the same clip. A few hours later, the Ministry of Defense reportedly tried to have the report withdrawn. Posts were deleted or changed, and new material was released. What initially appears to be an embarrassing mistake is actually more intriguing strategically. In a war where information control is a central component, such contradictions really shouldn't exist. When official sources first announce the complete conquest and later inadvertently admit the opposite, it creates a credibility problem even within their own ranks. And speaking of the information war, there are still about 6 subscribers missing for 74,000. So if you haven't done it yet, feel free to do me a free favor to keep the reporting going every day. Russian military bloggers are sounding the alarm about a Ukrainian offensive in the Stepnuhirsk area. According to their own accounts, Ukrainian forces are gradually pushing Russian units back there. The tone is unusually defensive. Increasing difficulties are being reported. The location of the attacks is a bit further north of the former Chokova reservoir. After the destruction of the dam, the reservoir has largely dried up. In theory, the wide, now shallow section provides a natural barrier of about 20 kilometers, but in practice, this area does not seem to be a stable defensive line. Russian channels report significantly more intense air and drone attacks in this area, and it suggests that Ukraine is trying to use the open, hard-to-fortify zone for operational purposes. Where water once formed a barrier, there is now difficult but passable terrain, especially for drones, artillery, and precision airstrikes. The complaints of Russian propagandists are interesting in that they indirectly confirm that pressure is building there. When even regime-loyal channels talk about problems, it's usually a sign that the situation on the ground is very tense. Whether this will lead to a major breakthrough is still unclear, but it is clear that this section is developing into another active hotspot, and the Russian side is less consolidated there than they would like to portray. And if we take a look at this on the map, we have several attacks here, especially from this area. At the blue pin here, do we already have a Ukrainian flag? Actually, we can redraw this here, something like this, and declare it as Ukrainian controlled. Additionally, more attacks occur on the road. The Russian bloggers are reporting, I think the next target will be this village here, in order to recapture the area again. That's not really wide. We can see here in the Russian-controlled area, it's a maximum of 4 kilometers. If the Ukrainians control that, then they will first cut off the Russian units here in the water, who can't break out anywhere else, since they can't swim across the water. And they increase the pressure again on Kamyansky, which was actually still in Ukrainian hands 2 years ago. Let's take a look at these modern air fighters, completely without pilots and just as drones. 3 Ukrainian interceptor drones pursue a single Russian Shahed kamikaze drone. In the first few seconds, you can see the other 2 interceptor drones from the perspective of the third one. After a successful hit, the Shahed detonates in the air. The shockwave even reaches one of the distant flying interceptor drones and visibly throws it off balance. For a moment, it seems to lose control, But the pilot reacts quickly, stabilizes the system, and regains control of the drone. As soon as the situation is secured, the next target appears. The operator spots it early, launches another attack, and is able to successfully intercept the second Shahed as well. The video mainly shows how much aerial warfare has changed. Instead of traditional anti-aircraft guns or missiles, we see flexible, relatively inexpensive drones hunting other drones. Speed, reaction time, and precise control are replacing heavy systems that used to be extremely expensive in the past, especially when it came to missiles and their ammunition. And if someone now says that the Gepard can also shoot down the Shahed cost-effectively, then they're absolutely right with that statement. That's true. Shooting down a Shahed with a good German Big Cat is also many times cheaper than using an anti-aircraft missile. But a single shot from the Gepard costs almost 560 euros, and since it has twin cannons, you can basically double that amount. That means that with a single burst, each shoot-down can still cost a bit over 10,000 euros, even if you're very precise. So 3 interceptor drones, which weren't even all needed, are much more cost-effective for drone pilots. And let's stick with drones for now. Ukrainian border guards discovered a Russian S-219 self-propelled howitzer. The 152mm self-propelled gun was hidden in a shelter. What's really noticeable is that the hatch was open. The 2S-19 is one of Russia's most important artillery systems. It fires 152mm shells over long distances and is regularly used to support offensives or to attack Ukrainian positions. Such systems are crucial for Russia because the war is heavily influenced by artillery. Above all, Russian doctrine is partly based on artillery superiority. The fact that the howitzer was discovered despite being hidden shows once again how closely the battlefield is now monitored. Drones are not only finding moving targets, but also stationary systems in the rear areas. An open hatch also suggests that the vehicle was either just used, which I don't think is the case, since you can't see any soldiers there. Was discovered since you can't see any soldiers there. And catchers protect each other? And yes, why? Thank you to all channel members and the Algae crew, especially Lieutenant Colonel Renica, Scylla, Dietrich, Freddy, and Meyerhofer. Please subscribe, like, and comment. See you next time for the report.